I said, baby. She said, what? I said, come here to me. She said, I said, honey. She said, yes. I said, give me a kiss. She said, I said, why, oh, why, don't you love me? Don't you love me? Why, oh, why, don't you love me? Don't you love me? Why, oh, why, don't you love me? And she said, 'cause I know you'll break my heart. I said, darling. She said, what? I said, let me hold your hand. She said, I said, sugar? She said, yes, I hear. I said, don't you understand?
Nice guy who pretty funny. He's really, really smart.
He's social, outgoing, kind, wonderful person. He's always everywhere, and he loves everyone, and everyone loves him.
He has an incredibly strong view of family.
Really earnest guy. You know, what you see is what you're gonna get from him, and I don't know if it's that common. He is who he is, and he's not trying to be anyone different.
He's great at like everything he tries to do.
Number one is an elegant lady. She epitomizes what a lady is, and that's rare today.
You know, very caring and nurturing.
And she is one of the most persistent people that I've ever met. She's the one that organizes everything and everyone, and she's much of a planner in that way, too.
Planning and organization.
A very sincere and loving friend.
She's really friendly, loving person. A pretty good sense of humor.
And she's an outstanding mother and grandmother.
You need her, she's Johnny on the spot. I know I can count on her.
And she's an appreciator of art, that she enjoys music, listening to symphony.
Laid back, soft, gentle, kind to a fault.
Love culture and education. I mean, they love going to the theater, they love going to the symphony. They were really the matriarch and patriarch of our family. They kept us together. They were generous, they were funny, they were loving, they gave of their time.
I think they're the perfect pair.
She and Frank together. And I think their children are lucky to have parents like that.
They really are the gems of today's society. Always interested in everyone, always trying to do something for somebody. Saragale and Frank Weinstock, unbelievable.
'Cause I know you love me too.
Met her in the coffee shop at University Hospitals in Cleveland. She was having coffee. She worked at the hospital in the medical record department.
I got a job at University Hospital in Cleveland, and I had just started working there in July, so I had worked there for a couple weeks. And the record department was run by these two little old maid ladies.
The medical record librarians were the stereotypical librarians, and she was new.
You know, I was still kind of naive, and we had a coffee break, which was 15 minutes, and boy, you didn't get back 1 minute late. So I was in the coffee shop, and I got up, and Frank followed me, and he wanted to get to know me better. So, and he followed me in the office, and I thought, oh my God.
I walked in and asked her for her phone number. Would she want to get rid of me? So she gave me a phone number, basically said, get out.
Well, so I got a piece of paper, I wrote my phone number down, I said, call me, now get out of here.
She had nice knees. Sitting out in the courtyard at University Hospitals.
And then he called me, and I think we went to a movie on our first date.
And that was it.
The night we got engaged, there was a big snowstorm, and he had gone to Pennsylvania to get a ring that belonged to his aunt.
And I was making $35 a week, so I had really basically nothing. Then I came back and saw Saragale on the way back, and I guess I proposed. I don't know, maybe it's like.
He gave me the ring, so I called my parents, and I said, my father answered the phone, and I said, guess what? I'm engaged. And he says, to whom? I mean, I'd been dating him for months.
We got married in, I think it was about 8 months, which was, our kids think is, they can't understand how anyone could do it, and never had any regrets.
Met in August, engaged in February, and we got married in May. So that was, my children think that's pretty fast, but maybe by today's standards that is, I don't know.
My name is Frank Weinstock. I'm from Boca Raton, Florida, and Canton, Ohio. Born in Newark, New Jersey. My parents were Michael Weinstock, whose family came from Austria. My father was born in Newark, and my mother was born in Bucharest, Romania, and came over at 6 months of age. Mother's parents were Grossmans. Complained for her whole life for a lousy 6 months. She was a naturalized citizen, but she came over, and her mother lived a little longer, and I got to know her, and she tried to teach me French and things like that. She lived with us for a little while. I basically am a clone of my mother, just a lot of traits. I'm not sure what I lived in a 3-story house in Newark, New Jersey, and I had a sister, Joan, and my brother, Tom. Period of time, my father's sister, Celie, lived with us.
Compared to most of my friends, my parents were educated people. Most of my friends, their parents were either merchants or held jobs.
I loved my father. He was a doctor, and he was very involved in what he was doing, and he worked hard. Then he went in service. Yeah, we missed him.
Days when my father was in service was a little different because he wasn't home a lot. So we learned to help our parents a lot, my mother a lot. We used to have a calendar in the kitchen. Frank and Tom, Tom and Joan, Joan and Frank for who did the dishes one night, who cleared the table, and on and on. So then we had to help my mother because she was teaching and came home to the 3 of us.
My father, his sisters, especially one of them, really paid for him to go through medical school. And he came from a very simple background. He worked very hard, never made a lot of money. He served in both the First and Second World War.
Before the war, he had his office in the house, so we were always together. And then after the war, when he came back, he bought a building across the street from our apartment house. They had nighttime office hours then. But we had dinner every night together. And my mother, she didn't work for the first few years of my life, but then when my father was in service, we moved out to California for about 1.5 years, and she got a job homeschooling in San Francisco.
She taught until she got married in 1925. And during the war, she went back to work as a teacher, as a substitute teacher.
Probably 3, 4, 5 years, I was a unbelievable holy terror because I apparently had a speech problem.
He'd get down on the ground and kick and say, "Yeah, block." That's where I went around the block. And he was a real brat.
Nobody could understand him. And this frustrated him terribly.
I was always frustrated. I just throw things around the house, and I would go up on the 3rd floor and throw all my clothes down on the 1st floor. It just was hard for my parents.
Out in front of the house, they used to tie a rope around him and tie him to a pole because he was so rambunctious they were afraid he'd run away. So he was, until he learned how to speak, he was a very difficult child. And my father sent him for speech therapy lessons at the Newark Board of Education. And he had a dog walking service. And I remember one lady paid him $1 a week. And another lady, she paid him like a nickel every time he walked the dog. And she wasn't very generous. I remember that. It wasn't a dog walking service, it was Frank's errand service.
Dog walking errand service. Nice life once I got over my behavior problems. We
did things together, went to baseball games, football games.
Going to the beach, Asbury Park, or Deal.
Went to the Jersey Shore, to the ocean, and had a pretty good life. And when I was in high school, well, I went in 1942. When my father went in the service, we lived in San Francisco twice. He was in the American Army on a Norwegian troop ship as a physician. Went to school out there twice, once for a couple of months, and then second time for a little over a year. And then I came back to Newark. We moved from the house into an apartment.
And we were in San Francisco during the war. Now, that was when he was 11 and 12 years old, 1944 and 1945. And those were the days when a kid that age could go on a bus or a trolley by himself. And he used to go on a bus and a trolley and a cable car, and he'd go all day on one token. He'd just keep getting transfers every time he got off and went on another one. And he used to disappear for hours at a time on the various means of transportation in San Francisco.
Did that concern your parents?
No, at that time, that was fine. You felt perfectly safe with a child of, 11 or 12 years old, wandering around the city, which sounds strange.
Did they think it was strange that he wanted to do that type of thing?
Yeah, they were happy. It kept them busy. Inexpensively. That was the time when I think it was a nickel to get onto the original means of transportation, and then you kept getting transferred. Maybe it was 7 cents, but it was very inexpensive.
Played in the marching band, the dance band, played clarinet, and we had our own dance band on the debate team, and just had a very, very nice life in high school.
Well, of course, a defining event in his life was that he had that condition, Beck sarcoid. Because of that, I think he was out of school 6 months or a year. They were very traumatic events. But he graduated from Southside High School when he was supposed to, and went to Allegheny College. Well, to me, the thing that has been continuous throughout his life is that he just gently goes forward. He doesn't stop. He never goes backwards. He's always moving ahead.
My father would have been very happy to see me succeed. My mother saw me up until my internship when he passed away, and obviously she's very proud, very happy.
My father's dad died when he was 17, and I think his mom died probably within 5 or 6, maybe 10 years after that.
My father's illness was really the last year and a half of his life when he got the diagnosis of cancer. And I apparently was a little naive. I didn't quite realize all this stuff that was going on. And
3 years after he got out of service, he got sick with lung cancer. He was a very heavy smoker, and he died 3 years later.
After a while, obviously he was bedridden. He went pretty fast when he did it. Until then, my brother and I used to drive him to New York for his radiation treatments.
My father didn't live very long. He died at 56, so I was very young.
He really didn't live through what turned out to be the golden age for doctors.
My mother's parents, Sam and Seal, were like my father's parents at that time. I remember it was really striking to me even at the time that he called them mom and dad, and that was a great thing, I think, because it really created a family and a sense of cohesiveness and roots in Canton, Ohio for us.
My name is Saragale. My maiden name was Rhine-Glass, and my name now is Weinstock for the last 50 years. And I basically grew up in Canton, Ohio. Since I was 4 years old, we have lived there, although I was born in Chicago. My parents were Celia Green Rhine-Glass, and my father's name was Samuel Rhine-Glass. He was a general surgeon and my mother was a dietitian.
A lot of my father in me, he was very persistent and meticulous and almost obsessive compulsive. On the other hand, my mother has a high degree of achievement-oriented ability.
He was a general surgeon, so he was not around a lot. I remember my mother's father very well because he passed away. I think I was like 20. I was like my second year in college, I think. And his name was Barney Green, and they lived a couple blocks away from us. And we spent all the holidays together. And I never knew my grandmother. She actually died while my mother was pregnant with me. I never met her, but I am named after her. We moved to Canton, Ohio, and my mother's two brothers and her sister lived there. And so we had a lot of cousins and a lot of family. And
my grandmother, who would have 9 great-grandchildren, actually just on my side of the family and 3 on the other side of the family, but the only 2 of her great-grandchildren that she knew were Gabby and Serena. She passed away when they were about 2.5 years old. And I talk about her all the time to my kids. You know, she was really an incredibly special person.
Well, my mother was a very, very compassionate person. And I like to think I'm like that. I try to be. She was very caring, nurturing, very nice. Yeah. She was a smart lady.
And what about your father?
He was very smart too. And they were both very upright, good citizens. They did the right thing. But my father was he was a serious person. He worked an awful lot. He was gone from the house. He was the plant surgeon for Republic Steel, and they had horrible, horrible injuries, as you can imagine. So he did that in addition to his regular work. So he was a pretty busy person. We lived in a house on 15th Street. It was 815 15th Street, and it was just my brother and myself and my 2 parents. Well, we walked to school. Nobody rode a school bus or anything like that. We went to Gibbs School till I was in the 8th grade, and then we moved. My parents built a house on 23rd Street, and we moved there. And then I went to Lehman High School. I actually went to the University of Michigan nursery school because my father was taking a master's in public health at the time. I don't remember anything about it. I just was told that we lived there for a year. My parents put me on a train when I was like 9 and 10 and sent me to Chicago to spend a couple weeks with my grandparents. And my cousin Lynn, who lived in Little Rock, Arkansas, was also sent there. So the 2 of us spent a lot of time together with my grandmother and grandfather. And they lived in a very small apartment, but it worked out somehow.
Sam's father, Abe, was alive. He died, I think, when he was 90. And he's the one that was born in Russia and then got recruited into the army when he was probably a late teenager and escaped out of Russia in the back of a hay wagon to Poland, and then I think met his wife there, Helen, and then they moved to the United States. They moved to Chicago, and he became a barber. And because he was a barber, he obviously cut a lot of people's hair, but then met a lot of other people, and he was friends, or he cut hair for George Halas, who was the owner of the Chicago Bears. And I remember they used to exchange greeting cards every holiday, in the holiday seasons. And that was a little bit of his claim to fame. But he spent a lot of time just working in that barbershop, raising money to bring the rest of the family. He brought most of the family over from the old country, from Eastern Europe. And he was a guy who always cleaned his plate, and he was used to living without. And he taught a lot of, I thought, good values to me, as far as the fact that he was honest and he was hardworking, and there wasn't a lot of fluff about him. But I think he also passed those down to my grandfather, Sam, who was a surgeon, a general surgeon. Actually, both my grandparents were general surgeons. Michael Weinstock, my father's dad, who I was named after, as well as Abe. And so they were both general surgeons, and my dad, of course, an ophthalmologist, and I'm an ER doctor. They were very fundamental in our lives at that time, Sam and Seal. And we used to do everything with them, the holidays and all those occasions. And it was great because they really did welcome my father to town, and I think helped him as he went through things with setting up his own practice. But they're really very, very close, because my mom, of course, was very close to both their parents. And she was at our wedding and walked down the aisle in 1997. And then a couple months after that's when she passed away.
We didn't have a TV when we were growing up. Jill's twin, they were 2 when my mother died. My father had passed away before that. So she did get to see 2 of her great-grandchildren, but there are 7 of them she never got to meet. I think they would have been overwhelmed, with joy. That's something very special.
I love him, I love him, I love him. Child of my child of my child. Child of the child of my child.
My grandmother and grandfather had a love affair. When my grandfather died, she gave me this box of letters that they had written to each other that were the most romantic thing you've ever read in your entire life.
I am certainly thankful for your pictures that you sent me. They, especially the one with your kid sister, has made my relationship with you seem more personal and more loving. Now, if that picture could only talk, laugh, smile, kiss, hold me in your arms as you are your sister, it would indeed be perfect. Affectionately yours, Sam.
I mean, it was just expected that we'd go to college, so it was never a question. I ended up going to the University of Michigan. I don't know why or how, but I loved it there. It was a great college. Well, it was more than a college. It was a university. It was very, very big. And I loved the football games, and I had some very good roommates who I'm still friendly with from there, and I really enjoyed it.
My mother also went to the University of Michigan for 2 years, and my grandfather, Sam, got his master's in public health at the University of Michigan. So we're a true Michigan family through and through. My brother Jeffrey went to Michigan, and I met my husband at Michigan. For an Ohio person, we happen to have a lot of ties to Michigan.
My father said, well, what do you want to major in? And I said, well, I don't know. And he said, well, if you don't know, I'll decide. In those days, you listen to your parents. It's a little different now. I was always interested in medicine, but I didn't really want patient contact, So he said, there's a new field now. It's called Medical Records Administration. And he said, but they don't offer it here at Michigan. You'd have to transfer to Indiana University. So I said, okay. So I went to Indiana University my junior year, and I took this course. And then my senior year, I was at the medical school campus in Indianapolis. So I didn't develop the roots there that I had with Michigan.
What drove me into ophthalmology? I'm not sure. I think of Dr. Frank, who was a little roly-poly ophthalmologist, a wonderful guy who was so excited in medical school when he would tell us about the field. I think he was a major influence on me. He just seemed to enjoy it so much, and it was interesting. It's a fascinating field.
He went to 3 or 4 different colleges because he basically went wherever he could get a scholarship. They didn't have money for him to go to college, so he went a year here because he got a scholarship money, and then he went somewhere else for a different time. I mean, he really struggled to make college a reality for himself. Then he was applying to go to medical school, and at that time there were quotas where medical schools would only take a certain number of Jews, and he did not get into medical school in the United States.
Well, no, and that's why I went over to Europe. A friend of my mother said for $5,000 I could go to school in Louisiana if I want to pay $5,000 to a legislator. That's the real world, and I wouldn't let my mother do that.
But he ended up going to medical school in Lausanne, Switzerland, which is the French-speaking part of Switzerland, and it was so important to him to get a medical degree and he didn't speak French, and he was going to a French-speaking medical school, and a lot of the words are, you know, a lot of the medicines and body parts, the names are universal, but he was basically studying to get a medical degree in a foreign language, and he went to Switzerland the summer before he was supposed to start, and he basically found a family and lived with them and only spoke French for 3 months, and by the time he started medical school, he was basically able to converse and read a textbook. And I always think about the fact that it was so important to him to get this education and to get this degree that he was willing to go halfway across the world and study in a foreign language because of his religion, he couldn't get that same degree in the United States. And that impressed me a lot.
Maybe in the time it was a lot of money, but I had $100 a month, and that took care of all my expenses, everything. That in Europe, I spent a lot more time traveling. I would just go to the outskirts of town, put my thumb up, and whoever stopped. One time a fellow on a motorcycle stopped and got in the back. No helmets or anything. I didn't know who he was. And one time a truck driver said, where are you going? He was going over to the other side of Spain. I said, I'll ride for you a couple of days. And it worked out fine. My mother was sick. I felt I should really be somewhat closer to her, and I decided to try to switch to American school.
He was coming home for the summer for a few months, and he was halfway through, and my mother said to him, yeah, bring home your stuff, bring home a transcript, maybe you'll get into an American school. And he wasn't sure that that would happen. But, you know, it was one of those things, what could you lose?
Right.
And I think the first or second call he made, which was towards the end of August, it was called, I guess, Upstate, Syracuse. Whoever he spoke to said, well, if you can get here in 2 or 3 days, we might have an opening. And he went up there right away and he got admitted. I think he started the next week.
And an American degree is better to have if you have a choice. I went to Syracuse and finished my medical school, got my MD degree, and I did my internship in Cleveland, Ohio at Mount Sinai in 1960, and my residency in Cleveland, Ohio at Case Western Reserve in 1961, after which I got out in 1964, spent 2 years in the public health service as a surgeon there, and started in practice in 1966.
We were in Washington, it was because my dad was in the public health service, and he was doing work during, I'm guessing, the Vietnam War, that he was doing his service for the public health service out of Washington. And I think he did a lot of stuff with glaucoma and some research type of things.
Residency, they were drafting people to go to Vietnam, and I guess I was a little naive because a friend of mine, Bob Nozick, called me and said he was going to the public health service. Do I want to go in? And I hadn't thought about it. And I called his chief. He says, fine, if you want to come with us, we'll take you. And someplace along the way, I was looking through my mail and I found a letter saying my induction orders would follow. I don't know how I never looked at it, apparently. But, so I would have been inducted. Rather than go in the Army, I signed up for the Public Health Service, and I was ophthalmology consultant in Washington, which is what got me involved in academics. I worked with the top ophthalmologists in the United States and worked with them on their research projects, supervising them, and then they got me involved in public speaking and ophthalmology and writing, and the rest is history. After residency, I spent 2 years in Washington and then had to make a decision whether I'd go in private practice or academic practice. I had a chance to take over a department up northeast, or there were a lot of academic openings that were offered to me. I decided to go to Canton, Ohio, where Saragale's from. So we used to go back and forth, and her parents were there, and I decided it would be a good life, and I have no regrets. It was I decided I want to be able to see patients on a daily basis rather than be a surgeon who does loads of operations and never sees a patient again. Unfortunately, I was involved more in academics than most academicians, so I had the best of both worlds, and I was my own boss. I could do what I wanted, could teach where I wanted, accept talks wherever I wanted. They were open to me and involved in research and contact lenses and glaucoma for years. So it couldn't have been any better. I'd do it all over again. And then after about 4 years in the office, someone comes in and asks me, how do you spell ophthalmology? And I told them how to spell ophthalmology. They said, well, on your way out, you better look at your sign. So there was a sign right over the office, and ophthalmology was spelled wrong. But I never looked up that high. I was just so happy to be in the office. So after 4 years, I did change it, spell it correctly. Got up in the morning and I was exhausted, which almost never happened.
When we were younger, you mean?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And Mom said, why are you so tired? I went out twice in the middle of the night to operate, and she never even had any idea that I left.
Anybody could get in bed with you. You wouldn't make a difference.
Well, that is true. I
Yes,
feel
you're
like
right.
somebody who might not normally be,
And he's writing articles or whatever he was doing initially with handwriting and eventually with the computer. And he was always there that, hey, listen, let's go for a walk around the block with the dog. And he said, whenever you're ready to go, you tell me, I'm ready to go. So it was always that feeling like he is always there. But if we're not doing something with him, he's always working. So that was a pretty unique, and I think his job was unique in that sense that he was able to tailor it to be able to do those types of things, to be able to have that time for his family.
I've worked here for 30 years, believe it or not. I started July 22nd, 1983. This was my first job, and that's how I know Dr. Weinstock, because he was my boss. I wouldn't be the person I am if I didn't have him in my life. Kind of tell me how to be a good worker and have morals and support. And I think he was just a shepherd to people, because he'll give you his shirt off his back.
Hi, I'm Dr. Weinstock.
He remembers things about my husband and my children. He always asked about my daughters.
Very concerned about his patients, very meticulous. A pleasure to work with, not only with the patients, but as a friend here at work. He was always interested in your family, always asked about you, cared about your family's health. I know when my dad passed away, he showed a lot of concern for me and my family at that time. He always seemed to have others in mind, not just himself, but always others in mind, and caring about their family and everything.
Okay, how are your kids doing?
Really fine. Courtney just graduated from Ohio State.
Hi. How old are the kids? 13?
My daughter's 14, the boy will be 12 here in a couple of weeks.
And he remembers all my kids and all my grandkids. He's got a very good memory.
A very kind, family-oriented. We were his family too. His office was just a second family for him. Very concerned for his patients. Just very, very much wanted to do whatever he could for that patient in their eyesight.
He's a smart man. He knows a lot about a lot. I think there's some people out there that know a lot about a little or a little about a lot, but he knows a lot about a lot.
There was always something new and interesting, always something he was working on. So clearly there was always something outside of just the mundane, the everyday. No matter what he's doing, and he's always doing a million things, he's always got time for somebody or something else.
He has always been a great sounding board for me for running the practice, hopefully the way he wanted it run and the way he had set it up for years from the very beginning. And we had a wonderful relationship for a long time, and I envied him and respected him, and he was a mentor to me and almost a second father to me. So it's worked out wonderful. I have nothing but the highest regard and respect for him.
I
I think you miss a lot in life if you don't have children. I really do. On the other hand, you're safe from an awful lot of heartache.
It was still during my training, and then we had Michael was born, and I guess he was about 3 weeks old, and we got in the car and drove to Washington with absolutely no knowledge of what we were doing. But we learned. And as I say, I have no regrets. Canton was a great place to raise a family.
We moved back to Canton to be with my mother's family.
We moved back to Canton in 1966. And Michael was, 2. And the next year Jill came along and...
Remember Field Place? Upstairs portion of the duplex, and it was just great for the kids. Michael enjoyed playing out in the field and finding snakes and other animals.
And we decided to build a house.
And Jeffrey came along.
Yeah.
The Midwest is much more based on, it has different values. People who live here, stay here, they spend a career here. That's very different than people who travel around and move from place to place, which I did when I was younger.
We ended up adding on twice to that house, and it's been about 40-some years.
When they were building it, because they had hired the builder, they steam shovel and they're scooping out the basement. We would go there and visit a lot to watch how the progress was going. I remember that, and they actually let me go up in the steam shovel and work the controls to help dig out the basement. I'm sure I didn't really do a whole lot of actual digging, but that's one of the things that self-confidence-wise and happiness-wise and all that was just like a sentinel type of thing with my parents' philosophy is, we're doing this really cool project and let's empower our kids to be part of it, which I thought was really, really neat. And I remember Joe playing on the dirt and climbing up the rock piles and the dirt piles, and they were building it.
Michael planted this tree over here from a couple little twigs.
At that time, in 1964, it was probably assumed when you have your first kid, that's when you stop working.
You have a child, that's it. And our first child, Michael, had colic, he didn't sleep, and he didn't eat. So that was a little stressful, but fortunately he grew out of it. Now he's a gourmet eater. I could kick myself I used to stand on my head to get him to eat. But see, he survived. I'll sum it up for you briefly. Jill would tell us the day before she decides to get pregnant. Michael would tell us the day after, and Jeffrey would tell us on the way to the hospital to have the baby. So that's the best way I can sum it up. But we're all very close.
And as young parents, they have their first child, and just how exciting that must be. And for us to have that memory, the visual memory of them, and to seeing them at that time, at the ages that we are now, or even younger, boy, that's just an unbelievable thing to have that. And I just, when I've been able to watch those, just treasure that so much. Growing up in Canton was really good, and it was a small town, but we never really viewed it that way because we had our community. And on Yale Avenue, I had some really good friends there. And the time beforehand, my parents' friends, their kids would come over there. But when we moved to Yale Avenue, my sister was already born, and I don't remember her being born because I was only 2.5. But I remember my brother was born, and I remember my parents bringing him back from the hospital. He was born on February 4th, and they brought Jeffrey back, and it was a snowy day, and I just think we were excited. There wasn't, as I can remember, any sense of jealousy or that we weren't going to be the focus anymore. It was more just a excited thing that we got another kid in the family.
My mom is always, very caring and nurturing, and it was a very nice childhood that I had. It was, really a very kind of Leave It to Beaver type situation. I had a father who was around and interested, and my mom didn't work, so.
I think it's very important for children to have some time with nothing planned, nothing scheduled, that they can just use their imagination and do whatever they want and play and not be structured.
Everybody says I look like so much like my mother. I think we were taking our dog to the vet or something when I was maybe 5 or 6 years old. And this woman, stranger, says to my father, "Is this the child of Saragale Rhinegrass?" And my dad says, "Yes, this is his daughter." And the woman said, "I haven't seen Saragale since we were in grade school together, but this child looks exactly like she looked like when she was 5 or 6 years old. She didn't know me, she didn't know my father, but I looked that much like my mother." I hope that I have gotten some of her kindness and gentleness. She really is. She's just a very gentle and loving and nurturing person. Like when I'm having company over and one thing is out of place, that is a hereditary, I would actually say Weinstock trait, but it's really a Rhinegrass trait that, I got from my mom. When she manifested that type of behavior, I always thought it was ridiculous, and I am exactly the same way. When people are coming over, I want everything to look nice and be just so, and I want, I don't want to be doing anything while they're arriving. I want everything to be perfect, and I love to entertain, and I do a ton of entertaining, but I love it, but it makes me tense, so it's sort of a vicious cycle. So that's like a little thing that doesn't matter.
When I look at my mom, one of the biggest things that I see with her that might not be apparent initially when you see her is persistence. And she is one of the most persistent people that I've ever met. Eli had a special blanket, and it was this blanket that we must have bought like right as they were finishing making this blanket, because we went for a walk around the block and he dropped his blanket. And we walked around and around and around and couldn't find that blanket. And the next day we were leaving for Canton. And Eli was probably 2 and really shook up about it. That was a special blanket, a special thing. And we got back to Canton, and I told my mom what the blanket was, what it looked like. And I think she'd called 40 or 50 department stores, and she found that blanket at one of the department stores. And we got there, and we drove there and bought that exact same blanket and probably washed it in the same detergent that he was used to. And he got it, and he hugged it so much. And that was something that was important to us, and because it was important to us, it was important to her.
My mom was great. She's she was our great nurturer. She really was wonderful to all of us. My mom and I used to go on great shopping trips together. She used to sew and make clothes for us, and she would make clothes for my dolls and Halloween costumes for us. And I know she taught me how to sew, and we used to sit at her sewing machine and sew together. And she really, I think her goal was really just to keep her family happy. And whatever it took, if one of us needed something from a store and we went to a store and they didn't have it there, she would look, she would go to 10 stores until she could find what we need, whether it was a piece of clothes or something for an art project or something for a sports team, whatever it was. She was just very interested in providing for us and helping us out. And she also loved to cook and make parties and, have big family dinners.
My dad used to walk to school and pick us up, and he'd walk with the dog, and at that time our dog's name was Ginger. She was a golden retriever. And he'd walk, it was probably 3/4 of a mile, maybe a mile to the house. And he'd walk and pick us up, and we'd all walk home from school together. Because of his job, he was able to work, I think, just Wednesday and Friday mornings. Funny, I remember his schedule that he had for seeing patients and when he did his surgery days and all that, because it's pretty defined. But he would walk and pick us up, and probably initially it was just me, and then with the other kids we'd all walk home together, which was really nice.
Walk to our elementary school in the winter with our dog, and we'd always pick up a few neighborhood kids on the way. Like, they'd be standing waiting at the bus stop, and they'd be like, "Can we walk with you instead?" And we'd end up going sort of like in a big entourage of kids walking to the school.
When I was growing up, that whenever I came home from school, it seemed like he was always home. So he was always around, and he was there, and he was. I think it's pretty rare that your dad's home at 2 o'clock or in the afternoon. So it was nice to have someone who was around that much and who was always interested in what I was doing.
My mother, because she didn't have she didn't work outside the home at that time, she would always be home when we got there, which was a nice part of things too. So we didn't have any of those days of getting home to empty homes or having to stay for after school things. So that made a big difference with things, I think, too.
His work schedule allowed him to spend more time at home than probably a lot of other dads. He had days where he didn't have office hours and days where he did surgeries and operated in the morning and in the afternoon free. And we'd come home and he'd say, what do you want to do? You want to go to the park? You want to go for a walk? You want to go ice skating? And he was up for anything. It was really, really great. And he really just always, even today, he's always like, to my kids, he says, do you guys want to do something? You want to go to the beach? You want to go? He likes being with the family a lot. And I think it was great.
Just that overall impression is of both my parents being there, that was important to us, and I think as a family also.
I never fought with my parents, and it seems like a crazy thing to say, but my parents, Frank and Saragale, are just really, really good and kind and gentle people, and we never fought. We didn't agree with everything all the time, but we never fought, and I think if I tell people that, they're always shocked by it, but it's really true. I mean, I'm sure as a little kid I had temper tantrums and I wanted things that I didn't get, but as I got older and I got to the age when I think a lot of my friends were headbutting with their parents, I was always able to have conversations with mine and talk to them, which was a really good thing.
Everyone got along and we did our things, and my parents were supportive of everything, and I don't remember there being a problem.
And not that we always agreed, or not that they gave me everything I wanted or let me do everything I wanted. I have a very strong memory of a whole bunch of my friends were going out one night to see a movie that was a rated R movie, and I think I was already 16 or 17, and my parents told me I couldn't go because they had seen it and thought it was too graphic. And I remember being so shocked because there were very few things that we weren't able to discuss and get beyond and get to a point where we both agreed. So they didn't let me do everything I wanted, but we were able to really talk a lot of things through. My first memory growing up was about my dog, Ginger Peachy. We had this awesome golden retriever. Years later, I think of her as kind of like a dog like Lassie, or like the dog Nana in Peter Pan. Like, this is a dog that practically, even when we were little kids, my parents could have almost like left us alone with this dog. She was so awesome. My brothers and I she would lay down in the family room and we would all lay our heads on her, and she would like be a pillow to us. She was just really, really great. And we used to go to the park all the time with her, and she would crawl up a sliding board. She would actually walk up the steps of a sliding board and go down a sliding board.
Even as a really young kid, people asked me what I wanted to do. I said I wanted to be a doctor. And sort of funny, although probably obnoxious story also, probably through my whole life, but starting in second grade when we used to learn how to write cursive, and I would sign my name really quickly. And I used to see my dad come home and sign prescriptions, and he would bring a pack of 100 or 1,000, and he would sit at the table and we'd be talking, he'd be signing the prescription. So his signature was on there already, and then all I had to do is write out the prescription, or maybe the person that was helping would write out the prescription. And I remember my teacher said to me, your name is too sloppy, it's too messy, you need to write neater. And I said, well, I've gone through and I've calculated that if I can write my name in 1.5 seconds instead of 4 seconds, through the course of my life, the number of times that I'll be signing my name, I'll save 3 days of my life in just signing my name. And I'm sure my teacher just totally rolled her eyes and said, if you actually have done that and made that calculation, you can sign your name any way you want. but I'm sure in the back of their mind they were also thinking, that is like the most obnoxious thing I've ever heard.
So my parents used to travel all the time, and they would leave us. My grandparents lived in the same city that we lived in, but they didn't babysit us, they didn't stay with us, but we always had these babysitters, and for some reason it always seemed like that they didn't particularly like kids, and we hated when my parents traveled and we were left with these babysitters. And so one time my parents were going somewhere and they gave us all these notebooks and said to keep a journal while they were gone, and I kept this journal the whole time that they were gone of everything that my brothers did wrong, and I would write something like, Jeffrey burped at the dinner table and didn't say excuse me. Michael walked down the hall in his underwear. And so we used to, that's just like another memory too of the fact that they used to travel, and that one of our babysitters, we got locked out of the house one time, and she took us to her house, and we stayed there for, I don't know, like some undisclosed amount of time or whatever, but we always had these unbelievable stories for my parents when they came back, which I never really was sure if they would believe them or not, but they were really all true, these crazy stories that, happened to us when they were traveling.
There was one babysitter we had, and I was taking a bath, and I was probably 9 or 10 years old. I got out of the bath and I was drying myself off, and she came in the room, which I thought was surprising. And she looked behind my ears and said, "You didn't wash behind your ears. You need to go back in the tub and wash behind your ears." And I said, "No, I don't." And she got upset with me, and I told her that my parents would not make me wash behind my ears or to do something that I was empowered to make my own decision on that. And I had every bit 100% of confidence that my parents would support me when they got back. And they did. And that's one overwhelming theme with my parents, is instilling self-confidence and problem solving into their kids. And that's one thing that I feel very important with our own children.
Like, but if we were like, we could be so sick, and my dad would be like, "You could be sick in school as well as you can be sick at home. You don't need to stay home from school." To the point where it was almost like, "I know you have a severed head, but you know, you don't really need to stay home for that." Like, it didn't matter how sick we were, like nothing could get a reaction from my father. Nothing would earn you a day at home. Nothing.
First grade or second grade, and it was recess, and the teacher had to, I used to like to read under the teacher's desk, and they would say, "Hey, you know, you need to come out from under the desk, stop reading, and go to recess." I remember, you know, there was a time we had, one of our best trips ever was the trip that we took out west, and we flew into Denver and drove around and went to Jackson Hole and hiked up towards Lake Solitude and the Grand Tetons. But they used to say to us, like, "Guys, stop reading, look at the beautiful scenery out here." And we're like, "Oh, okay, great, thanks." We go back to reading. So I think it was sort of unique for them. It wasn't like the type of kids that they really needed to be on. "You need to do your homework." I don't remember my parents helping me with homework ever. I don't have one single memory of sitting at a table and my mom or dad helping me with homework. Not because I was so smart, just because I think I was more of a self-motivated learner. So there wasn't that feeling like you have to be a doctor, and you know, if you don't grow up and do this, we're not going to approve of it, or disown you, or of course anything that radical. And when Olivia and Eli were probably, I don't know, 6 and 4, something like that, and so it was raining. So we got this jogging stroller. So Beth put the kids in the jogging stroller and put the hood over it, and went for a jog around the block in the rain. And my parents were down visiting, and so my dad and I went for a walk. So it was raining, and I'm a big taking the dog for a walk kind of guy. She has to walk every day and that sort of thing. So I'm walking barefoot, and it's in the summer, and it's raining, and we're walking down the street with the dog, and then there's Beth jogging down the other side of the street, and the kids are in the jogging stroller. And it was so funny because we got back, and Olivia said to me, she says, "You know, Daddy, you're always saying that Poppy's the do-anything guy. If he's really the do-anything guy, why were you barefoot? He was wearing an umbrella." So I was like, you know, you can still be a do-anything guy and not want to get your head wet.
Well, growing up, we, believe it or not, had a trailer that we used to go camping in. And it was a 27-foot trailer that we pulled on the back of a big van that we had. And I know a lot of our friends thought it was funny that we pulled this trailer that had air conditioning and heating and a microwave in it, and I think we had a TV. But we would go set up on these we'd go to campgrounds and we'd set up and we'd make a fire and we'd cook our food, and we'd go for hikes and set up a hammock, and it was really amazing.
And my parents used to come and at school on a Friday afternoon when it was warm outside, and they'd pick us up and we'd all go down and ride our bikes and chop down trees and make fires and cook and things like that, and it was a lot of fun.
He became really good friends with the principal of our elementary school, and then we used to go camping with him, which is also very typical. My dad's a friendly guy, and my brother Michael, you know, in many ways is like that, just sort of like the more the merrier, kind of like a Pied Piper kind of person, you know, bring people along and want everyone to share in the fun, and the more the merrier.
And the very first time we went camping together, we went to Mohican State Park, and we had a campsite right next to the water, and I remember my dad was there, and we camped for years and years after that. My parents bought a trailer, and we used to camp in the trailer and have little chairs out there and cook on a fire. And he always gets up. He's always gotten up early, like really early, 6 a.m., 6:30. And he would get up and go sit down by the water and read a book. And he's always loved sitting by water, whether it's a river or a lake. That's just been his thing. Like if you ask anybody, they say, Frank loves sitting by water. And he would sit down and read a book or write his articles or whatever he did. I said, I'm not sure I'm going to go to medical school. I think I might just, be like a line from a Bob Dylan song, just sit and watch the river flow. And much to their credit, even though I'm sure both of their heart rates went above 150 at that time, neither of them said anything at that time. And they didn't try to argue with me or convince me what I wanted to do or what I should do. They let me make that decision for myself. And then, of course, I, know the end of the story. I decided to become a doctor. But years later, they told the fact that that was a very, very stressful conversation that they heard. And I'm sure now, as a parent, I can relate to that way more than I was able to when I was younger.
If Mike had joined a band and quit medical school, he'd be like any other struggling musician. Don't think he would have made the top 10.
Actually, no, the engagement was about 7 hours, but it was a pretty quick relationship.
Yeah, we met, we started dating in May of 96,
Right.
and then we got married Thursday, August the 22nd of 1996. And we just went down to the courthouse basically wearing shorts and t-shirts, and we didn't tell anybody we were getting married. We didn't have any witnesses, obviously.
And I don't know that we completely knew that we were going to either. Right. I think we were both kind of calling each other's bluff, and no one really said chicken.
And and what's unbelievably surprising is that we're so risk averse. It's not even funny.
Yeah, it's very out of character for both of us.
Unbelievably out of character. So we got married. We didn't tell anybody, and then we got married. And I think the first person you called was your brother.
Right.
I was about to start my third year of law school, and so I had to withdraw or take a leave of absence for that semester since I was going to be moving to Canton, Ohio. So I remember Jeffrey calling his brother from the quad at the law school.
Well, he was he was pretty surprised, although he found it very
amusing.
Yeah.
I spoke to your parents for the first time.
It
was a Thursday, and then we drove up to Ohio, and we got there on Thursday afternoon, and I met my new family. I wouldn't rewrite the script. I think it's a beautiful love story.
Absolutely.
Ted and I had been dating for a while before we got engaged. And after we'd been dating for a while, my mom started saying, so what do you think's going to happen? Do you think you're going to get engaged soon? It's because, you get to that point where you think it's going to happen pretty soon. And we did get engaged in a pretty traditional way where he asked me and it was a surprise. And so this is a little secret that I didn't tell Ted until we'd been married for years and years and years and years. But my mom was kind of pushing me. She's like, if you're going to get married, it would be really great to get married on Labor Day. And if you're going to get married on Labor Day and we want to have it at the temple, we need to secure the date. So when do you think you're going to get engaged? And I said, I think he's up to something. I think it might happen soon. And she said, well, I'm going to call the temple and tell them to hold the date, even though you're not engaged yet. And I said, I don't know. Is that bad luck? Is that whatever? My mom said, let's do it. So we actually called and put a date on hold at my temple where we wanted to have the wedding on Labor Day weekend. And I think like 6 weeks or 8 weeks later, he actually asked me to marry him. But my mom kept saying, so what's going on? We have to give him a deposit. Are you really going to get engaged? So we told him that years later, which he thought was really funny. And my mom is great. Like my mom really, we had a 10-month engagement, and that was her job for 10 months. So she worked on my wedding, and I was out of town, so she really did most of it, and it was beautiful. It was a gift that they gave us. It was big, and it was fancy, and it was lovely. And I'm not overly particular, and she really did most of it and made most of the choices. We worked together on a lot of things, and she was just very excited about it, and she did a absolutely beautiful job. It was a great night.
I
was a medical student at Riverside Hospital in Columbus. Michael was a resident. And I think at one point we talked in the cafeteria at the hospital, but then he called me to ask me out. But the funny part of the story is that he called me to ask me out while I was in a colonoscopy, not my own, another patient's. And I had to answer the phone while there was a patient in the room having a colonoscopy, which was sort of funny. And he asked me out, and we went out that evening after work.
Yeah, we started from the bottom and then worked our way up.
We dated 2 years, then moved in together. And then a year later, we're engaged, and then a year later, got married.
The funny part about that is my grandmother, close with Beth actually, they had a really nice relationship, and she would say, listen, I don't even mind if you guys don't get married. I just want you guys to have some grandkids for me.
She said that a lot, actually.
She said that a lot, yeah.
She asked me to have a baby like 2 years before we got married.
Yeah.
Disconcerting.
It was the baby with me, though.
Right.
So, that part was all right.
Right.
It's been amazing raising my kids with their grandparents so close by. I grew up with my grandparents a 5-minute car ride away, and my kids have grown up with their grandparents. You know, in the summer my parents aren't here, but basically for most of the year and for most of the major life events and the holidays and the times where we've needed each other, you know, where my parents have been able to help us out, and hopefully I've been able to help them out a little bit. We've really grown up now. You know, I've raised my family living so close to my parents, and that's, I think, a huge blessing.
Yeah, it's nice because we live here. We live about 10 minutes from Jill and Ted. My parents are 5 or 10 minutes away from us, and so it's nice to be able to grow up around not only my parents, but also around Jill and Ted and their kids, and the Gabrielle and Serena come over and babysit for us, and Kyle and Ryan really get to see their cousins a lot, and it's kind of the way that I think my family was when I was growing up in Canton in the 70s, and if I was still there, obviously it wouldn't be like that because no one is there anymore, but it's nice to have so much family around.